Hi, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make use of Firebase with your Ionic Framework Android and iOS mobile application. So if you're not familiar with Firebase, it's actually a kind of object storage database that is very convenient. They have a lot of well-written APIs that will allow you to synchronize data between your platforms and between your devices with little effort. So let's go ahead and start by downloading the Firebase JavaScript library. Let's go ahead and save the link as, I'm going to save it to my desktop. Since we're going to be using Ionic Framework, which uses AngularJS, we're also going to be downloading the Angular Fire library, which is the AngularJS extension set. So let's go ahead and download that too. We're also going to save that to our desktop. Alright, so go to your terminal. We're going to go ahead and create a fresh Ionic Framework project. So we're going to run Ionic start Firebase example blank. Now this may be a little more of an advanced tutorial, so I recommend that you first learn how to use Ionic Framework, understand it. Also understand how to use AngularJS, because a lot of the topics in this might be a little more complicated than many of the other tutorials that I've written. So with the Ionic project created, let's go ahead and navigate to it. And we're going to go ahead and add the Android platform to it. If you were using a Mac, you could also add the iOS platform, but because I'm using Ubuntu Linux, I am unable to add iOS. We're going to stick strictly to Android for this tutorial. Alright, let's go ahead and the next thing we want to do is we want to copy the files that we downloaded to our project. So let's go ahead and open up the project. Sorry, my dog is barking. Let's go ahead and go to www and then the JavaScript directory. Let's copy those two files into the JavaScript directory. Now what we're going to do is we're going to open up the index.html file in our favorite editor. In this case, I'm going to be using GitHub's atom.io for editing these files. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to include these libraries. So we can do that right above the app.js. Let's go script source equals js firebase.js, and then script source equals js slash angularfire.min.js. I think that's what it was called. Let's check in a second. It'll actually show me right here. Angular Fire and then Firebase. Perfect. So let's go ahead and save that and open up the app.js file. We need to add the directive into the Angular module. So let's go ahead and add it. Alright, so just like that, we're ready to start using Firebase. So before we even get started, we need to do some configuration on the Firebase website. I'm not going to log into the Firebase website, I'm just going to show you the code that we'd be adding. So the code that we'd be adding is actually for the rules and permissions. So that way we have, so that way our account is a little bit more locked down. So you'd be adding the following. And I'll explain what it does in just a second. Let's clean it up a little bit. Alright, so you'd want to actually add this into your rules and permissions section of your Firebase control panel. So what we're saying here is under the users object, we're going to allow everyone to write, and that's because we want everyone to be able to create a new account in our application. And then as far as reading information inside of a unique user ID, they have to be authenticated first. Otherwise, they will not be able to read information in people's accounts, and that's for security. So everyone can write, but not everyone can read. And you're going to go ahead and put that in the control panel of Firebase again. Alright, with that said and done, we can actually start making our application. So let's start inside of the app.js. So let's clean this up a little bit. I like to be a little more clean in my code here. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is we want to use a global Firebase variable. And we do that because we want to be able to access the same instance across all of our controllers. So let's go ahead and create that and call it Firebase and make it null. So FB for Firebase, not FB for Facebook. Alright, and then inside of our onReady, we're actually going to initialize this variable. And my Firebase is actually called Amber Inferno 4704.firebase.io.com. Alright, yours will be different. Please don't use mine. Mine is locked down. I encourage you not to use it. Use your own, please. Alright, with that said and done, we're actually ready to start using Firebase in our application. So, but before we do that, our application is going to be composed of two screens. It's going to be composed of a login screen where we're going to be able to log in or register and log in, and then a screen with a to-do list where it's just going to be a list of items that are synchronized with Firebase. So in order to make that possible, let's go ahead and we're going to make use of the AngularJS UI router. If you're not familiar with that, I do have documentation on my blog. Otherwise, please go ahead and learn about it. So let's go ahead and do example.config. State provider. I'll explain this in just a moment after I type it out. Alright, so with that all typed out, what we're actually doing is we're creating a login template which uses the login controller and a to-do template that uses the to-do controller, and by default when we launch our application it's going to show the login controller or login state. So now what we want to do is we want to create a front end. Let's go ahead and create a front end for this. So we want to create a templates directory, add folder, templates, and inside there we want to add a file called login.html, and we're going to add the following. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add a list. After we do this, and now we're going to add some form elements. Alright, we've got our username field. Now we're going to copy that and make our password field. Now we're going to call that password. Alright, we're almost done. Now we need to add some buttons. So this button is going to be responsible for login, provided they already have an account. Alright, and we're also going to create another button. I'm going to copy and paste for time, called register. So what's going to happen here is we're going to enter in our username and password. If we already have an account, we're going to choose login, and it will log us into the next page. If we don't, it's going to create an account for us and then direct us to the next page. So with that said, we can now actually go back into our app.js file, and we're going to create a controller, the login controller. Scope, Firebase auth, and location. Alright, let's go ahead and create that login function. Alright, so this is going to use pretty much the Angular Fire documentation exactly. There's not really much that I've altered. So let's go ahead and do the following. Oops. Alright. So what's happening here? We're getting the Firebase auth directives. We're going to use auth with password, so username and password. I know Firebase does offer login with Facebook or Twitter and stuff, but for this example we are only going to use username and password based authentication. We're going to pass in our username and password. If successful, we're going to route to a different page. In particular, we're going to route to the to-do page. If there's an error, we're actually going to alert and say error. And we're going to print out the actual error description. Alright, that is actually our login function. So now we can go ahead and proceed on to the register function. So what's going to happen here is going to be pretty similar to what we just saw in the login. Alright, so you can probably see that so far this is looking pretty familiar. Alright, the only difference here is we're going to add the following in here. Alright, so let me explain what's happening. We're getting our authorization object. We're going to create a new user. And then when that new user has been created, it's going to return the promise that goes with the authorize with password. So it's immediately going to call authorize with password after it creates the user. And then since it's returning it, we can then use the then, and on success for the auth with password, it's going to redirect us to the to-do page. Otherwise, it's going to throw an error. So let's go ahead and see what our page looks like. Make sure that there's no errors. Open that with Firefox. And it does not look right because it doesn't have our content that we added. So let's go ahead and see if we can figure out why that is. First of all, yes, it does say the login up there. So that's because we didn't add anything in here. We want to replace this with the Ion nav view. And let's go ahead and see if that worked for us. And yes, it did. Let me go back to our code here. The Ion nav view says that it's going to render whatever is in our UI router states inside of the index.html file. So it's now rendering a nested state. So going back here, you can see we have a basic username and password form with a register and a login button. That's great. So let's see what happens when I type some gibberish in. Yes, so the specified email address is incorrect because there is no account like that. We can even validate. Yeah, the user does not exist. So it's pretty smart when it comes to logging in and registering. So we'll come back to that in a second. We're actually going to move along. We are going to move along and start making our to-do controller. and the to-do page. So let's go ahead and create a new page. Call it to-do.html. And let's add the following. Alright, we're going to add a navigation button. Alright, we actually added a navigation button because this is how we're going to create new to-do list items in our application. So moving beyond that, let's go ahead and add the rest of it. Alright, so what we're doing here is we created a list. Of course, all of our to-do elements are going to be in the to-dos, and we're going to just display them on the screen. So with that said and done, let's go back into our app.js. We're going to add a controller for this. We're going to add Firebase and Ionic pop-up. Alright, so we actually have two functions in here. We've got a list function, and we've also got a create function. Let's go ahead and start with the list. This one's probably the most complicated of the two, although it's not too complicated. So we're going to do the following. Oops. Alright, so we're checking to see if we're authorized. So we're getting the authorization status. And then we're going to do if Firebase auth. It throws me off every time. So if it's true, that means we're logged in and we can continue to get the data. Alright, so what this says so far is if we're logged in, we're going to get the node that is the particular user node. So inside the Firebase auth object, there is the unique ID. For username and password based logged in, it's usually going to be simple login : and then a unique number. And that's going to represent the unique ID for our particular user. So now that we've got our sync variable, we're actually going to create a sync object. Alright, so now we've got a sync object which we are now going to bind to an Angular JS object. Alright, so what's happening here is the data element of scope is going to represent our user node. And we're going to, just like you saw in the to-do.html, we're actually using data, and data contains an array of to-dos. So this is on our scope, just like we assigned it in our app.js. So let's go ahead and move along to the create function. What we're going to do is we're going to initialize an Ionic pop-up for our simplicity. I'm going to enter a new to-do item, and input type is going to be text, and then it's going to have a callback. And inside the callback, we're going to do the following. We're going to make sure that the user actually types something in, because we don't want to populate our database with empty data. And then we're going to check to see if the object has been set before. So let's do the following. So what we're checking for is if the to-dos element does not exist, and it won't exist the first time that you log in. It will not exist. Same for when you register. It will not exist when you register. It will only exist after you add data to it. So if it does not exist, we're going to do the following. Scope.data.todos equals an empty array. And then what we're going to do is we are going to push data to our object. Alright, we just pushed a new to-do item to our to-dos array found in our data object, which we've determined to be users and then the Firebase unique ID. So then what's going to happen is you can choose to add if statement if it's not complete. I'm just going to leave it as that. So let's go ahead and test what we've got here. Let's go ahead and go back to our application. Let's go ahead and register a new account. And something is not right. So I believe our error is actually in our index.html file still. So if we go back, let's go ahead and alter this. It's a little too complicated still. So let's go ahead and slim it down. Alright, let's see if that did the trick for us. It did not. So there were actually two errors in the code after I went back and looked. I actually had typed this twice inside of here. What we wanted was we wanted to have the to-do and then the title, because that is what we defined inside of our push object. So going back in here, I also had an error that I was calling this icon plus. It needs to be ion plus. But with that said and done, let's go ahead and go back, and you can see that it looks correct now. Let's go ahead and try to add a new item. Wash car. So it added it to this list. So, well, how do we know it's working? Let's go into our simulator. We're going to build the project. Again, if you're on a Mac, you can build for iOS as well. It's almost done. Alright, now that it's built, let's go ahead and install it. And let's go ahead and open it. And let's see if I remember my account that I used. Hopefully this is my password. If not, it'll tell us. And it did log us in, and you can see that the wash car element is there. So let's go ahead and try this. Clean house. So it was there, but where'd it go? Is it here at all? No, it's not here. So somewhere along the line, something went wrong. Let's go ahead and try it again, just for kicks. It seemed to work this time. Maybe I had some kind of network hiccup. Let's go ahead and check to see if it added. Yeah, it did add. Let's go ahead and add another one. Buy shoes. Let's go back into our simulator. And it's there. So as you can see, you have an application that synchronizes everywhere. Web browser, mobile app, wherever, it doesn't matter. So let's go ahead and exit out. We're going to open up the app again, and we're going to try to register the account that was already created. And as you can see, it's already in use, so we can't create the account twice. So Firebase is pretty smart. Like I said, it's pretty smart with everything that it does. So let's do a little rehash on everything that we've done so far, starting with the index.html. So what we did was we changed it up a bit, so that way we're allowed to have navigation buttons inside of our individual states. We also added a nav view, so that way we could render our states inside of our index.html file. We added Firebase and Angular Fire, which is the AngularJS extension for Firebase. That's the scope of what we added to the index.html file. Moving on, we added to our login.html file, we added a form that contains username and password. We added two buttons, one for login, one for register. And then in our to-do UI view, we added a button for creating new to-do items. And then we have a list of to-dos. So when we open up our app.js file, we initialized our Firebase. Again, don't use mine. Please don't use mine. Use your own. It's free on firebase.com. Just register an account. We created our state controller here for our UI router. In the login controller, we have a login function which logs in with username and password, and then a register function that will create a user and then immediately log in. And then in the to-do controller, we find our logged in user and we synchronize it as a AngularJS object. And then for create, we just push new items to the to-dos object whereas if it doesn't exist, it will go ahead and create one. And then again, go ahead and add these rules to your Firebase rules section in your dashboard.